Okay, so I need to switch back a couple of times in between at the beginning because otherwise I won't see you because now I only see my slides as well. So what Sandra asked me to talk to you about for a couple of minutes is how to build mobile prototypes with AXURE 7. And since the beta is out, and I know you will be talking about that, also I will be touching a couple of topics concerning beta 8. So to get to know you guys, oh, sorry, why did she ask me, a guy from Germany who is not sitting with you guys? Well, I wrote this book and it's now in its second edition, and it looks actually quite torn due to the fact that I decided that I'm going to write an update, so now it has like handwriting all over it and marks and things I don't like. So if you happen to have read it and really hated parts, now is the time to tell me because I might change it. So this is what I want to talk to you about. First thing is, why prototype at all? That will be very brief, but since I didn't know what crowd would be there tonight, so I wanted to touch the basics at least. And then there's the question, why use AXURE for prototyping or even mobile prototyping? There's a lot of other tools out there now, and we could pick anyone because there are so many tools nowadays. Then I want to briefly go through some mobile basics and how do they impact AXURE or impact your prototypes or how you build your prototypes. Then talk a couple of minutes about how to structure your prototype in AXURE. And the next one would then be how to view it. And last but not least, if we still have time, I have some bonus material with me as well. Starting with why prototype. The quote I like best is by Totsuki, who wrote one of the few books about prototyping. There are not so many. I found 4, I think. So what I like about it is that it says it's not a technique or something you learn, but rather a practice to design things that you should adapt. So it's a philosophy that you try out things and see what works and what doesn't work. And what we often do tell ourselves, well, we want to show the non-designery, non-UX folks what the UX of the product will be like. And a lot of times we deliver wireframes or these bizarre-looking flowcharts where people might not really know what they mean. They make sense to us, but to other people, maybe not so much. So I think that's why prototyping is so essential, because even if it looks very rough and very unfinished like this, those were screenshots I did from a paper prototype with a class, and I just threw them together and put the animations in, give people a feel and understanding what it means. And I hope, and my guess is that even if it's in German, you kind of get what the screens are showing there. You have now a keyboard, and you can enter things, and you see all the state changes. So prototyping really gives you a better idea of what the end experience will be like with anything that you try to create. Another advantage, and I think the problem is explained here very well, you want to try out things and you want to fail early, fast, and often. And it's a big fear people have if your prototype is not working, that we get to laugh at you. Well, we do, and we will, but anyhow, I think that's the big benefit, that you don't invest so much up too late when it's too late and you can still change things. So the question remains, why should we use AXURE for it? So since AXURE is only one tool of many, I think now every other week a new prototyping tool comes out. I hope you can't read the typing. How many tools do you recognize by the icon? There are 15, I think, or 12. 15? Who recognizes 10?
Yeah.
More than 10?
No.
No. See, it's horrible these days. So I mixed, before, I had the slide, I used the slide before I only used the first 2 rows, and almost nobody knew all of them. I guess I'm a collector and nerd, but the point is I used only offline tools, but now the 3rd row with InVision, Proto.io, and Pixate are 15 now, and there's so many of them, and they all have different capabilities, and it's kind of hard, to come to grips of what is best for your project or what is the easiest to work with. So why use the 16th AXURE with it? One reason are how they are structured. So some are page-based tools, some are layer-based tools, and some of those tools are code-type-based tools. So what that means is the simplest of all tools, like InVision, for example, or Balsamiq, which is really popular, you can see in the top row. So you have you scribbled a page, or you beautiful did a page in Photoshop or Sketch or whatnot, and then you just define a hotspot where you can click, and then you link to a new page, and a new page, and a new page. And the big advantage of AXURE is, and that only a few other tools share, is that you don't need to redo a whole page, because you have dynamic panels or layers and other tools that you have a certain area that you can update and change, and that can reflect the changes. And I think that's really the power that AXURE brings to the table, and that's why mobile prototyping is so nice with it. Also, what it then makes it really easy, that you can create nicer prototypes. So if you do horizontal prototypes, you kind of do a tour of the house of an application or website. You show one full screen, and then you show the next one, and then the next one, and the next one, to kind of give the people an idea, this is like the hallway, this is the bathroom, this is the kitchen, and so on. And prototyping a spotlight, so doing one use case in detail, is way harder, because you have to recopy a screen, recopy, and with dynamic panels or layers, it's easier to do. So AXURE makes it easier on you to prototype in the end. The second reason why I think AXURE is a good tool, because there are certain levels of fidelity on prototypes. This slide or this diagram I stole from Gail Swanson. She says, well, it's visual fidelity and interactive fidelity. And I think, as I just said before, it's a third one, it's structure, how easy you can nest or make your prototype more reflect of what you're going to see. So in both dimensions, AXURE actually plays not only on the top visual fidelity one, because you can link high-end images in there or create your own visual elements with styles, or you can just use wireframes. So AXURE actually supports those three dimensions really nicely. And the third one, which I think is really one of the strengths of AXURE, which is not really used, is that it supports your full workflow. You can start with wireframes, you can make them interactive in prototypes, you can even create specifications, something that I don't like, but I sometimes have to do. And actually, it's a pretty good and an easy way to do it if you plan ahead with AXURE. And since with AXURE 8, there's now this, I think it's called screenshot widget, information architecture and UI flows are now even easier to create. So you can now link different screens together with little arrows, and you can say, this is the structure of my app, of my website, this is what you're going to get. So all those elements can be created with AXURE. And I think that's also only one or two tools share that capabilities. So to summarize the strengths, I think AXURE has quite a low learning curve. If you get beyond that, it's not really pretty, and that it's getting better. Some things are quite cumbersome. I think you can get really fast. Plus, you don't really need coding skills. A couple of my designer colleagues strongly disagree, but if you kind of get around conditional logic, and if you understand how if then else works, I think then that's all you need to know in terms of coding skills. You can host it free online. AXURE is now around for, I think 2 or 3 years. And all libraries that you can think of, mobile even, are available online. Some are paid for, some are free, but you can get started really, really fast if you're willing to spend. I think the prices are going up. I think like $100. You can get all the mobile libraries you can think of. Another strength, as I said, it's layer-based, so you can really change just parts of the screen, and you don't have that much work when you do a complex prototype. So you have quite a lot of flexibility. In terms of mobile capabilities, it can detect and work with gestures. You can prototype animation and transitions, even more so with AXURE 8. They just improved there quite a bit, I think. And you can build not responsive, but adaptive prototypes, and I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes what the difference is and what that means in terms of ACCURE. And the big benefit, and that's why I started writing this book 3 years ago, was that you can create HTML, and that was a time when we were still prototyping for Nokia S40 and S60 devices, which didn't have a browser, couldn't show HTML, we had to work with Flash. And when the first Google phone and iPhone came around and had a browser, this was like heaven, because now we could prototype really and show what the applications would be like, and then we could use ACCURE for the first time. So some mobile basics, because I think mobile is really interesting, but also very widespread in terms of capabilities and what you need to do. And it's not that hard to get started with mobile prototyping in ACCURE, but it has some hidden depths, I think, and some tricks that would make your life easier. So first one, the user interface. So all the elements that we use. So on iOS, we kind of went from, I probably misspelled that because this is such a horrible word for a German term, skeuomorphic design to a flat design. So they kind of took away all the gradients and took away all the leather stitching from the address book and made it look flat. Android went from a different direction, also looked flat on the first look, but they put more thought, or they put more of a philosophy behind it, because they call it material design, because they have a couple of interactions and how things behave that they give you the feel that it's something that it's really has physics in it. So it also has now, iOS also has those details, but they're not really the same. They behave a bit different. So the big takeaway is that you shouldn't mix and match. I found this, I couldn't find the source, but I thought that it was brilliant. So when should you use material design on iOS? Actually, never. So it has different paradigms, and you sometimes see them mixed and matched on iOS. One example is the sidebar menu that slides out from the left on iOS. And I think that will pretty soon be gone, because with the new iOS 9 on the tablet, you can now move the one screen 1/3 to the right, and then if you use the sidebar menu, you have now like blinds all over. So you shouldn't really mix some of the interaction paradigms in one of the UI elements when you prototype. So what do? Well, I think, as I said, you can buy all those libraries online for a couple of bucks, but I think the better way is to make your own, because very often people use images, so it's just like a bunch of images taken from one of the other open source libraries like the Tian and Lux PSD files or sketch files, or some other freely available iOS libraries, and turn them into ACCURE. But the better way, as I said, is to use styles within ACCURE, and this is a screenshot of the ACCURE 8. So what I did for Deutsche Telekom, I recreated all the elements that we have and skinned them, and I did that in ACCURE, as you can see here, because then it's similar to CSS styling in HTML. You have very lightweight files. I can change it. I can change the size, and the images, since they are not images, they won't mess up your prototypes if you scale up or scale down anyway. So this is one point to take in mind. If you use libraries and if you have some time, I'd rather see that you do them yourself. Plus, it got way easier with ACCURE 8 to copy and create your own styles for widgets. Second mobile basic thing are, of course, user actions, because we want to see how people interact with it and want to prototype that. This is the from Luke Lubrevsky, the touch reference guide card. And ACCURE doesn't support all of them as of now. As you know, ACCURE 8 is still in beta, and this is kind of like the month before Christmas, because now if you go to the forum, you can basically ask for any feature if you have a good reason. And you don't have such a bad chance that things still go into it. So if you want to support me and ACCURE and the greater good, I ask for that we get the pinch open, pinch close, and the two-finger scroll, because it's not possible to do that with JavaScript very easily. And I would love to get those actions, because that's one of the things that ACCURE still doesn't support, and a couple of other tools do. So how can you prototype them in ACCURE? For my book, I created this long big table where it shows that there are different user actions like a tap, a double tap, a press and a long press, and swiping gestures, that they all have an ACTURE event to that. The green ones are now the new one for ACTURE 8, so the list was correct for ACTURE 7, so this is now ACTURE 8. I just realized I forgot the on the left flag for checkboxes and radio buttons, but so there are even now more and nicer events to check. For example, scrolling. They finally have a scroll up and scroll down event that you don't have to calculate the last X value or Y value from the previous one to see which direction the user scrolls. So they're like small improvements, but they will make your life easier. The third one, and a big improvement, were animation transitions, because as we saw with the material design animation, how things behave makes such a big difference. And this slide is an older one. This was for ACTURE 7, and this one is for ACTURE 8. So let me show you live. Can you see my web browser?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So before, you could only do one animation. So you could do something like a movement, the thing would move down, and when the movement was done, you could do the next one. So now this just became nicer, because now you can combine actions simultaneously, as it's explained in the ACTURE block. So now you can rotate and move. And let's see. Let's see what I did. Let's see. Yes, of course. Try again. Layers, I put it to back. So as you see now, so you can combine those two actions, and you can even say, how do they work? You can resize, which is also new. So all the new green ones are new actions that you can use. So you can now rotate elements and resize them, which makes small animations even easier and even nicer. Before I had to use animated GIFs to do the same trick, but now it became really easier. Those are the same old modifiers that you could use before, so you could make it bounce or rotate, see that it goes back and forth. And the transitions are the ones that you use. Are the ones that you knew before, so you could fade, you could have things slide to the left and right, but now you also have flip, because it was, for some strange reason, asked so many times within the forum. So those are all our new animations, and I think the big part is that you can combine them for one animation and then create even nicer, fluent transitions for your prototype and your elements. An important topic, and I think which is the hardest to grasp when you start with mobile prototyping and getting grip of all the different resolutions that the screens have and how to deal with them in ACTURE. This image is old, it's now 2 years old, but I think it's still almost true. What they were saying is iOS has basically only 4 screen sizes, and Android you have this massive amount because you don't have one company who controls the devices like Apple does, but so many different ones. I think now 1 or 2 screen sizes were added to it, but in general the image still holds true. So on iOS it's fairly simple, and on Android it's a bit harder to find which is the right resolution that you want to prototype for. Because the problem, or the thing you have to keep in mind is with ACTURE, you have to start with a specific screen size. So you can't build, as I said, fully flexible prototypes which are fluent. So you don't have a fluent grid where a header or elements can rearrange them at will. You have to start with a certain resolution. And if we look at iOS, I hope that these numbers are not too small. So basically, up to the iPhone 4S, you just had a 320 by 480 resolution. And those were non-retina screens, so they were rendered as they were, and the pixels were doubled. For the iPhone 5, they just made it a bit larger to the bottom, so you have like 568 versus 480 pixels. And for iPhone 6, with the display zoom, you even have the same size in terms of abstract points. iPhone 6 became a bit larger, and if you disable the display zoom, it's even a larger screen size. So what they did with iOS 8, when iOS 8 came out, Before you were getting the real pixel size, so an iPhone 6 would tell you back that it had the rendered pixel of 641, 1136, which was really strange because if you put an iPad next to it, it would have 1024 by 700 something, 570, which was really strange because the device was smaller physically, but the screen resolution was larger. So to make our life easier in terms of breakpoints and deciding what screen sizes they have, they now tell you when you ask an iOS device for the screen size, for the points that you get, which is a big advantage because now you can say, okay, I have a phone up to 400 pixels, maybe a bit more in terms of width. And then you can say, okay, this is now a tablet. And then at a breakpoint at, I don't know, maybe 700 if you want to get portrait, you say this is now a real tablet. And at 1,200 you have a real screen. So that made our life easier. So what you have to keep in mind, that those are the important numbers for now, the points that you get returned. How you render them, I'll talk about it in a second, is a bit different. On Android, it's easier because they usually return you, if you say at 1.0 screen size, they return also to you the real number that they have. So that's very different. But the same, I think a Nexus has like 600 by 800 something, Nexus 7 tablet. So how do you find out what screen sizes do you prototype for? Because if you prototype, you want to pick a target device. So that's either the device that you have in hand, or that's the device that your stakeholder has, or at a certain screen size that you can control, and it's very common screen size that you know. So the nicest website I found is mydevice.io. This is on an iPhone 5S, I think. So it tells you it has 320 pixels, it shows you and gives you all the details in terms of viewport, TSS, resolutions, and what you have. If you want to check what other screen sizes are out there, the other big website I can recommend to you is screensize.es, screen sizes. So they have a long list of what are the values that you have to expect there. And what I prototyped in Axure is a little master that you can throw into your prototype when you first set your mobile settings. I'll show you in a second. You put this master on the screen and it'll create in the bottom right-hand corner X and Y values of the current rendered screens that will help you to determine where you're on the right track, because sometimes it can cost a day if people are not familiar with the screen sizes and how to enter them in Axure. That's really burning your time and getting you a headache and wanting you to be a really bad in the evening. So the big question then, if you put in what do you put in those mobile device settings when you want to create a prototype? As I said, iOS changed that. So if you put device width and initial scale 1.0 under the width and initial scale setting, you'll get this value on iOS. So you'll get those values right here, or you get the right ones for Android. And user scalable, you usually want to disable, because otherwise people can pinch in and destroy the magic of the prototype that you have if you're doing an app prototype. And minimal UI, you can put in there if you're prototyping for iOS, then it'll hide a lot of the browser Chrome that you have on the bottom and on the top. Most time, I think you don't want to have an auto-detect iPhone numbers, you don't want to have clickable links in there, and you want to hide the browser navigation and the status bar, personal preference, but usually one has a default. So if you do that, you get screen sizes. If I go back to iOS to explain that, so you get 320 by 480 on an iPhone 4 or 320 by 568 on an iPhone 5. So that's fine in terms of using elements if you use styles, because if you use images, they might get rendered up or rendered down. You might get badly rendered images. So what you might want to do, if you want to be pixel perfect, you want to get to 640 by 138, which are the rendered pixels. To do that, that's fairly easy. You just have to change this value. So if you want to have Retina device on iOS and you don't want to have this 320 returned but 640, you put in here a 0.5 value. This is what I mean by the initial scale setting defines the effective screen size. If you put in 0.0, 0.5, you get a 640 screen width. But what you want to do then, if you do that, you want to put in the maximum scale as well. The maximum scale would be 1.0, that your prototype doesn't, screw up the rendering. By doing this, you can really define very well what you can do in terms of screen sizes. And another way, if you're doing web prototypes, so prototype of web pages, mobile web pages, and for example, you do that for a device which returns 320 by 460, but you have somebody who has a slightly different mobile device. You can also use the initial scale to scale to the perfect size. So if you know that the other device is 340 pixels, for example, divide that, you get the scaling factor, and if you put that, it will scale to the perfect width. Of course, the height will be off a bit, but in terms of showing, you can use this value to change what will be shown on the screen. So this is, I think, the hardest part in terms of understanding how to get your mobile up and running, the initial scale thing. But start with this, see what the thing returns to you, and then decide, do you want to render the points? Because if you're doing elements within AXURE that don't use background images, that they won't get blurry or distorted, you're fine. If you want to go with rendered pixel, double the time. So this is what it usually says here for iOS. It says render at 3 times. So you want to render at 0.33 to scale up, which is the same here. So if you have, what type of device do you have? An MDPE, which is the standard one. Well, it used to be a standard one. Now, these common devices have an XHDPE or XX, 3 times or 2 times the value, which is the same thing then here, 0.5 or 0.33, will scale to the right size. Which brings me to responsive web design, which AXURE has, I think, a pretty nice solution to it, but not perfect. As I said, you cannot create fully fluid websites, which means, what in my company, product manager sometimes do, grab the bottom right corner of a browser on a website and start dragging pixels around and say, see, this doesn't work really nice. And I say, yeah, but nobody does that but you, because it's made for different screen sizes, not for dragging your bottom right corner around and see what happens. But you can't create fluid websites. So what you do instead, you create adaptive ones. And adaptive one means, as the image on the right-hand side, which I stole, I think, from the actual website, that you have to define a set of breakpoints. And for those breakpoints, you do a single layout, and then you change it, and those are the adaptive layouts. So if you do that, UI elements then have 2 types of properties, adaptive ones and fixed ones, which is really, really smart, and which is a nice part about AXURE. You can say, well, where you place the element, what size they are, and what color they have, and what style they have, that's adaptive, because maybe you have top-hand navigation on a big website. If you then scale it down to mobile, you might have a left-hand navigation, or what you have. So this is adaptive. But certain things are fixed, which are the text on it, and the nice part is the interaction. So you don't have to redo the on-click values or the interactions that you did. You can just reuse it. They just look maybe different in terms of where you place them. And also a nice part is that you can create an inheritance structure. So you only have to do layout this one, first one, and then the next one takes this one. Then you arrange this one. If this one inherits them from that one, you can just copy links over. So it's a really nice system. And if something doesn't work, for example, you have on a big website, you have a top navigation, and you want to change it into a drop-down on a mobile site, which is a fairly common pattern, you can just unplace an element and then redo the interaction, or now with AXURE fire the event that's associated with it. So how do you create your breakpoints? There's 2 ways to do it. You can do mobile first, or big screen first, or you can do middle screen first and work to your sides. It depends on personal preference. But first, on paper, define your breakpoints, and then base that on devices you have, prototypes you want to show. I don't know. It depends on you. My recommendation is to start mobile first because, I mean, this is what we do, and Luke Wroblewski said rightly so. It'll offer you more constraints, which makes it better and easier to design what's essential and what needs to be shown. So if you do that, you start with the base view and you add a new one, and then work your way upwards, screen width-wise, with a greater or equal sign. So iPhone Portrait is greater or equal 640 pixel. Here I went for pixel perfect, and then takes the next one. So what you also want to do, if it's a bit off, set the page align to center, because if you go into a really big screen and you have maybe an active area of 1,200 pixels and your screen is 4,000, well, 4,000 is too big, but 2,000. If you set your page align to center, you still have the white space on the corners and you have the centered screen. So this works fairly well. Plus, if you're doing web prototypes, so of web pages, you get away with not having pixel perfect screen size on other devices as well for the other representation. So you do your base view, you put all the elements in there after you created all the different adaptive breakpoints. And then you do all the other ones one by one. And then you build your way up, and then you have your prototype that you can test. If I want to briefly talk about structuring your prototype, it's basically a discussion about pages that you do, that what Extra was made to do. So you have one page and you link to the next one, link to the next one, or you can do use dynamic panels to structure your prototype, which my recommendation usually is. So as I said, on pages you link from one page to the other. On dynamic panels you say, well, I have one dynamic panel and it has different states, and it's the first screen, the second screen, the third screen, and you might even nest that when you say, well, my first splash screen has like this update process bar, then it says it's done, and then has a check mark and it disappears, and then the second screen comes in. So you can nest that. And in Extra, in the bottom right-hand corner, it would look like this. So you have a prototype, a dynamic panel. It has a state which is called splash screen. You have one which is login. You have then a dynamic panel with two different states for the login and then a home screen. So what's the difference? So for pages, you basically have no learning curve, because that's what Extra is made to do. You can put hotspots there very easily, or animate or make the elements interactive. And the big benefit is that the back button on the browser will work, because it's different pages that are actually loaded. You have a loading delay when you click into your prototype. But the big drawbacks are that you need a dynamic panel to detect gestures. So if you don't want to put placeholder panels all over it, you want to use a key dynamic panel to do that. And this is why it's so nice with dynamic panels. Plus, animation and transitions now work with every element, but they used to work mainly on dynamic panels. So now this is not such a strong argument anymore, but animations are important, and if you want to do them, you want to do them on a dynamic panel. Plus, you don't have page transitions in Extra, so you only have that on a dynamic panel. So what I showed you before, the flipping effect or the sliding to the left to the right, which is a fairly common pattern on mobile apps, you can only prototype if you do that within a panel. So you want to do something like this. So the broad oversimplification in terms of, if you need a rule for that, link pages together for website prototypes, and panels, use it for app prototypes, because then you have all the nice transitions and the gestures that you might not need on a page-based prototype. But of course, there are exceptions to the rule. So what you do next in terms of building a prototype? Well, you should use mobile patterns, and if you need some inspiration, I think those are fairly good websites that you can take a look at. There's also a lot of books out there by now dealing with mobile patterns. And what I did, this is now the short commercial break in my book. No, seriously, what I did, more than half of the book actually tell you how to build those patterns in Extra. So of course, it's based on mobile, but it also works in different ones. And to show you what are the strengths now for mobile prototyping and how easy it became with Extra 7 and 8 will be even easier, I picked 3. So text field and forms is the first one, showing you, well, the biggest pain on mobile on mobile entry is that you always get a default keyboard, even though if you have something, for example, like a number or URL or search field. AXURE 7 introduced finally a type field dropdown. So if you can say, so this phone thing has a type and even has a hint text, and this now works that you can work with that. Plus AXURE 8 introduced, as I said, on select change and on unselect, I think is a new term. So you can even now fire events based on what people selected within dropdowns and checkboxes, which is really nice. So this is a big improvement for mobile prototypes because, I mean, this is what when you use websites online, what people do wrong and even on apps so many times. Another big thing for AXURE 7, what they introduced was push and pull widgets. So one of the hardest things to prototype were those accordion lists. So you can click on this one opens, the other one closes, and vice versa. And this became now really, really easy. So what I did is, this is a dynamic panel, this tiny one, open list, and it has two states. So one state is, it says closed with the arrow to the right, like here, and the other one is the open one. So this is one panel, this is one panel, this is one panel. They both have two states, open and closed. And what I do here to open one and to close one, each of them an on-click action, and it says, well, if you do that, push and pull the widget, it's up below. So if the size of this one changes, take the other ones with you up and down, and then just give me the next state. And this became such a big improvement. So it's now like 3 lines of code for interaction. So because each of this dynamic panel has one. But before it was so hard to prototype that I usually didn't bother to do that. They just became bliss. And another thing, what became very easy now, even easier, scrolling. So now you could, with AXURE 7 or 7.5, you could start working with the on-scroll events. Then you didn't have an up and down scroll event. But what you can do, which became a fairly popular header, that you have a header when you scroll up or down, or it hides that you get real full screen only content. And with those scroll up, scroll down event, you can now just have a header, which is an element that you can just show which slides up and down as a transition. So this also became really easy. So those are the easy cases, and this is what I explain quite a bit in my book, how to get all those different mobile interactions that you're used to on apps and websites working. Sharing your prototype. Since Sandra promised in the introduction, I'll briefly talk about how to share your prototype. And there's not so much to tell because there's now an app for that by AXURE, which makes our life much easier, because before it was really, really hard to get prototypes on your device because there were so many different ways. So if you download the AXURE app, you just provide your credentials that you have online, and you then get a list of all your prototypes. This is all the things that I have as an examples of my book. And if you click on one of the information buttons, you can say you can want to hide the status bar as a check mark. And then the big thing is that you can download it locally. So you don't have to have it online, but you can then, if you do this one download locally, you have it as a shortcut on your device, and you can just, without a connection, play it here. You might miss it on Google because by default the keyboard comes up and hides exactly this area. So because the email feed gets active, so I missed that on Android the first time around. So on Android it also exists, you just won't see it when you log in. You have to hide the keyboard first. But if you do that and you start your prototype, you have to swipe from the left to get the main menu, because then you get all the different pages which pertain to your prototype. This one only has one page, and it also allows you to navigate back and forth if you did click if it has multiple pages, or to return to the main list. So it's really straightforward and not the prettiest of prototyping presentation tools, but I mean, we're talking AXURE, which is also not the prettiest, but it's very functional and is working very well, I think. Another thing I wanted to show you, which is a nice feature, is that you can mirror your prototype. I think this is only for Android sorry, for iOS, which is called Reflector, what it can do, if you run the app like I just did, and I activate screen sharing, it works as an, you see, there we are. It works as an AirPlay screen. So this is now my live phone, and this is me swiping. And as you can see now, you can now record also just a new feature that they introduced to what we have. So if you see prototyping, this is a really nice tool to show people your prototype. And if you want to have control because you know some things work and some things don't work, it's very easy that you can show what you are seeing on your screen. And to get rid of it, you either turn it off. And yeah, this is Reflector, which is also a really nice tool for how to view your screen. Let's see, where's my presentation at? There. I think we're over time. Are you really still ready for 6 more slides, or are you done with me and fed up?
We're absolutely loving it. I am conscious.
Since I can see you, I trust you on that one. So.
Oh yeah, trust me on that one. I am conscious that you have to go. We would love the extra 6 slides.
Then you get the extra 6 slides.
Awesome, awesome, brilliant. We're ready.
So, bonus material. So a couple of tips, which I think are time saver, massive time. Know your extra shortcuts. There will be new ones because they're reordering how the menu systems work. But my most liked one are Command L on Windows. On Mac, I asked for the same shortcut because they just took it completely away, but I think I'll get it back because I'm bitching and moaning so much that this is the most time saver. Because what you get there when you press that, you get taken right to this thing, because then you don't move the thing around pixel by pixel, but you jump in here and you can tap back and forth and very easily change the position and the size of the element, which is the most important shortcut I ever use on Axure. The Shift key for proportional scaling, they don't really tell you that you don't have to type in X and Y values if you want to scale. Pressing down the Alt key and drag, you create a copy. The cursor keys and Shift, I think they are now doing it not 10 pixels per se, but depending on what are your separator lines. So you can say you have a raster of 10 pixels or 5 pixels, depending on the stage. And you can actually tap through the elements. So if you have layer on layer on layer on layer, and you kind of get lost within your elements, you can tap through them. And if you do that slow enough, and if you named your elements, you'll see on the right-hand side what elements you're in. Then give everything a name. Not everything, but everything you use, and you make interactive. So for me, that's widgets, dynamic panels, and interaction cases. Because, as you probably know, if you work with the Axure prototype quite a bit and hand it to somebody else, they won't have any idea what you did, and vice versa. If you get somebody else's prototype, you probably spend a couple of hours understanding how they build it, because you can have so many ways. So label the key elements that you use. And the way I label them, I mean, there's so many ways. So my advice is, I use camel case syntax, which is, each new word gets a capital letter, and I usually take what it is, where do I find it, and what type of element is that. So I have a login submit button, and I maybe have a search submit button, and so forth. So the elements usually have like a 2 to 3 letter shortcut, all caps ETN, or I don't know, a couple of other things. And by that, I can really search really fast within the interaction cases, because I use search quite a bit. Because otherwise, I scroll through a long list of unnamed elements, and a couple of them are named. So if I know it's on the login screen, I go for login or I go for submit, then I find my elements really, really fast. And I name the elements for the purpose of the prototype. What I mean, I usually don't name widgets, because if the widget is a button or represents a slider, it's a slider or it's a button or what it is, because Axure already tells you it's a widget, because that's the way the interactions are tied to it, or if it's a drop-down. they actually does know that. What you want to look for is where's my button, where's my drop down, where's my what you have. So I name the elements for the purpose I use them for. And be consistent, of course. I try that really hard and I usually fail, but yeah, you should be better than me on that point. Everything that you reuse turn into masters. I think that's even more needed for website prototypes, because there you have more masters since you work with pages. On dynamic panels, I usually do less masters because I usually use elements only once because I've dynamic panels. But if you do, turn them into masters. Plan ahead. What I mean by that, well, I usually think about what are dynamic elements in my prototype. So what is content that will change? Those will be dynamic panels. What are static elements that might be masters or not part of the content area? Which of them do have dynamic content where you have to tweak, put dynamic panels on sub-panels and so forth. And you want to think about how you stack your elements within your prototype, because otherwise, if you do that later on, it will be madness. Be lazy, be really, really lazy. Don't repeat similar actions. Even with Acture 8, you now have the fire event, which is a new action, which is really nice. So if you had two buttons who did the same thing before in Acture, you had to prototype or put the same interactions on two places. And if you want to change it, you have to remember that there's another place now. With Acture 8, you can now say, well, I put it on the one button, and the other button just says, well, perform a click on that other button, and then you don't have a redundancy in terms of interactions. So you almost have something like functions now within Acture, if you're not afraid of programming, which is really nice. And what I usually do, I do the structure first, and also if somebody explains me a problem or comes to me with a problem, says something doesn't work with an Acture, I usually don't look at the prototypes because I won't understand them anyhow. I ask them, so you have a panel and you have then this and that, and then I repeat that in Acture, and then I try out what they tried to do, and then I started adding all the other elements. So I usually do very bare bone one, just gray boxes, and see if it works, what I want to try, and then become fancy later on. This is also do small experiments before major changes, because if you work on a big prototype, and if you work with dynamic panels, which you will be doing often for mobile prototypes, it'll be a hassle to just change things around. You want to try if that's what you want to do is really working. Stick to the key use cases. I mean, it's so fun to prototype everything, and I learned that this is actually a real knife. You can buy that. The fun part is if you look at Amazon, what the comments are about this knife. But anyway, so this thing can do so many things, but you don't really want to carry that because it's really this big and weighs, I think, like 5 pounds. And what are the key use cases? Well, there's probably 20% of a thing that are being used 80% of the time, the Pareto principle. So try to prototype those. And another rule I even liked better was, if you think about what is critical for a good user experience, because it's something that you have to get right, maybe it's the checkout of a web store, or maybe it's, I don't know, the sign up, because that's so crucial for conversion. And what's complex for the user, because it might be new, it might have a lot of steps. If you find those elements that are critical for a good UX, and if they are complex for the user, I mean, those are also good candidates to prototype, because you have to get those right, otherwise all the other stuff is nice that you have them, but they're not as crucial. And if this would be Acture beats Anonymous, I often get lost into Acture because it's so fun to prototype certain things. I try to do too many things with Acture, and you have to stop yourself. I do, at least. You are probably safe, but don't try to do too much, because what will happen, complexity will fight back. So if you make too many changes, and if you do too many hacks, I don't know, inject HTML into Acture, what you could do if you want to, but then you have to take care of this prototype a month later in time. It will be a really, really painful experience. And the last tip, good enough is really good enough. If you can communicate what you want to communicate with your prototype, or if you want to find out what you want to find out, stop doing what you're doing, because if you want to do the full thing, then, learns with or HTML and prototype, don't do prototypes, develop the whole thing. prototyping is really for finding this crucial spot, testing it out, reiterating, and be done with it. I told you basically everything about the book. You don't need to buy it.
No, do buy it.
Well, it got very eager. I'm actually changing it, so I can only recommend that you hold back because I haven't decided in terms of changes how much I will need to change. From what it looks now, it won't be a major update. If it's not a major update, I will make a new print version, but I will make the online version on Kindle a free update. But that depends on how much time I put into it, because last time I said the same thing, oh, there's not too much to change, and I rewrote the whole book, and my wife thought I'm weird and mad and strange, which I maybe am. But so hold back and check or reach out to me and ask me if I plan to do a major update or a minor one. Because if it's a minor one, you're safe to buy the online version now because you have it for 7 and for 8 you get it for free. If I start changing everything again, which I hope I won't do this time around, and I have a gut feeling I won't, you're good to go. Otherwise, wait a month and you get a new cover. I have a new cover, so I get a new cover and new content as well, reflecting the actual part. That's me and my slides and my links and my Twitter link. And thank you. That was it.
Big round of applause.